single dad janitor yelled, "Don't get in the elevator." What the CEO did next shocked the whole building. Channel, Heartfelt Moments, Hook. He had calloused hands, a worn-out uniform, and a son waiting at home with an empty stomach. Nobody in that gleaming office tower ever really looked at him. He was just the janitor. The invisible man pushing a mop through marble hallways while suits rushed past without a second glance. But on one cold Tuesday morning in November, Marcus Thompson did something that stopped an entire building in its tracks, and it started with 3 words shouted across a crowded lobby. What happened next didn't just change 2 lives. It reminded an entire city what it means to be human. Subscribe, invite, before we dive into this story. If moments like these move you, if you believe the world still has good in it, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Heartfelt Moments, the channel where real stories of kindness, courage, and compassion remind us what truly matters. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment below telling us about a time someone's kindness changed your day. Now, let's get into it. Main story: Marcus Thompson was 42 years old and hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 3 nights. His 8-year-old son Darius had been running a fever since the weekend, and the pediatric clinic had a 2-week wait. The children's Tylenol was almost gone. The rent was 3 days late. And Marcus still had 6 floors left to clean before his shift ended at 7 in the morning. He worked nights at Callaway Financial, one of the most prestigious investment firms in downtown Chicago. The kind of building where the lobby chandelier probably cost more than Marcus made in a year. He didn't resent it. He just kept his head down, did his job, and thought about Darius. That Tuesday morning, just before 6 a.m., the elevator doors opened on the ground floor. A small crowd of early arriving executives shuffled in expensive coats, coffee cups, phones pressed to ears. Marcus was rolling his mop bucket toward the service elevator on the far end when he noticed something. Something nobody else had seen. A narrow metal rod, part of the elevator's interior railing, had come partially loose at the base. It was hanging at a dangerous angle, just low enough that if the elevator shook, which old elevators in old buildings sometimes do, that rod could snap free and seriously injure someone. He knew, because he'd seen the maintenance report flag it 2 weeks ago. It was supposed to have been fixed. Clearly, it hadn't been. Without thinking, Marcus abandoned his mop and jogged toward the elevator doors, just as they were beginning to close. "Don't get in the elevator!" he shouted. The crowd turned. Some looked annoyed. One woman rolled her eyes. A man in a charcoal suit muttered something under his breath. But they stepped back. The doors closed on an empty elevator car. Marcus knelt down with a flashlight from his belt and showed the building security guard exactly what he'd found. The guard's face went pale. Within 20 minutes, the elevator was shut down and a repair crew was called. The whole incident lasted maybe 4 minutes. Then everyone dispersed. Marcus went back to his mop. Nobody said thank you, nobody except one person. Richard Callaway, the 61-year-old CEO of Callaway Financial, had been standing at the back of that elevator crowd. He'd stepped off when Marcus shouted, just like everyone else. But unlike everyone else, he stayed. He watched the whole thing. He saw Marcus kneel down in his faded uniform with that little flashlight, quietly doing the right thing with no audience and no applause. Richard had built a billion-dollar company. He'd shaken hands with senators and rung the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. But in that moment, watching Marcus Thompson, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. He didn't say anything right then. But he asked security for Marcus's name. 2 days later, Marcus was called into the building manager's office. He'd barely slept. Darius was still sick, and Marcus had spent the previous afternoon in the ER after his son's fever spiked to 104. He sat in the stiff office chair, certain he was about to be reprimanded for something, running through every moment of the last week, trying to figure out what he'd done wrong. Instead, Richard Callaway walked in. He sat across from Marcus, looked him in the eye, and said, "You protected my employees. You protected this building. And I heard you've been going through a hard time. I'd like to help if you'll let me." Marcus didn't know what to say. He stared at his hands. Richard had already arranged 3 things. First, Darius had an appointment the following morning with one of Chicago's top pediatricians, fully covered. Second, a company fund that Richard personally contributed to had paid 3 months of Marcus's rent, giving him breathing room to stabilize. And third, and this one made Marcus's voice break, when he told the story later, Richard had spoken with Human Resources about creating a facilities supervisor position that Marcus was more than qualified for. A role with benefits, a real salary, and a schedule that let him be home before Darius's bedtime. Marcus sat in that chair and cried, not out of embarrassment. Out of relief so deep it felt like something loosening in his chest that had been tight for years. He kept saying, I was just doing my job. And Richard kept saying, no, you were doing the right thing. There's a difference. Conclusion, that elevator could have seriously hurt someone that morning, but what it actually did was reveal the character of a man that a whole building had walked past for 3 years without truly seeing. Marcus Thompson wasn't looking for recognition. He was just a tired dad trying to do good in a world that hadn't always been good to him, and Richard Calloway, a man with every reason to stay comfortable and disconnected, chose to look closer, chose to act, chose kindness when it cost him something real. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't always arrive wrapped neatly in a bow. Sometimes it shouts across a lobby. Sometimes it shows up in an office you were afraid to enter. Sometimes it's a man on his knees with a flashlight, and a man in a suit who finally stops to notice. You never know who's watching. You never know whose life is hanging by a thread. But you always have the choice to be the person who says, I see you, and I'm going to do something about it. Be that person today.